Hello everybody, this is Night and Day Marine. Hey guys, it's Ryan here with Night and Day Marine with another Marine Training Academy video for you. In this video, we're going to cover all of the sonar features on the Elite FS Sonar GPS combo. So what we're doing, first off, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to cover all the different features and options that we're seeing on the screen before we start going through the actual menu options. So we can see here, up in the very top left-hand corner, this is where we have our overlays set. The unit will automatically default to have these two overlays already on it. So you're going to have your depth and your water temperature already there. Now you can go into the display and change it and edit to basically have any kind of overlays you want by going down here and pressing your power button. We press it one time and then we can select edit overlay right here. And then we can go up here to the top right and select add. And then we can scroll through here and we can select any overlay data that we want to show up on the screen. Now I'm just going to leave it how it is for now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit X. But if you do select any options or make any changes, make sure you go down here and select save when you are done. Otherwise, that will not stay on the screen. So let's go ahead and hit save right now. All right, so now we can see down at the bottom of the screen where we have this little plus and minus. This is going to be our zoom in and zoom out. It's going to do the same thing as when we press our plus and minus buttons over here on the right. Now along the right-hand side of the screen, we're going to see our depth scale. We can see where it starts at the top here and it starts at 0 and it goes all the way down to 30 feet. This just allows us to be able to see where the bottom lines up with it. So you can just kind of easily look at it and see, okay, it looks like we're around 17 feet. And as we can tell, up with our overlay data at the top, that's exactly where we're at, 17.7 feet. Now let's go ahead and let's talk about what we have here at the bottom. Now, when we see the different color arrays right here, what that's telling us is that the brighter the color we have. So with this general color palette that is already kind of pre-selected, it's just the basic one that automatically starts off with. What you can tell is that anything that is more yellow on here is going to be a harder, more solid surface. And anything that's going to go from like red to purple to blue, it's going to be more of a softer bottom. Now with the sonar signal, as it goes down and it bounces off the bottom there, it's able to pick up a little bit deeper down in the surface there, but the signal is mostly bouncing back off the bottom. It can't really pick up too much, so it fades out into that kind of softer, lighter color there and into the blue. Now with everything else on the screen here, now don't be alarmed, up here at the very top of the screen, you're going to generally get a lot of color right there. Now that's just kind of like the surface clutter. A lot of times that's just going to kind of be dirt or silt and stuff that's floating on the top of the water. It can also be a lot of oxygen that is settling along the surface there. Now we can go through and we can filter that out, which I'll show you here just in a minute, but we don't want to filter it out too much because if we do have fish up in that area, it will filter them out as well. Now we can see in the middle of the screen here where we have these streaks coming up across there. Now generally those are going to probably be your fish that are moving around in the water. Now I'm sitting still right now, so any fish that's going to be below me, as long as it's not moving around, because that sonar signal is just pinging it off of it over and over and over and it just keeps bouncing right back at me, I'm usually going to get either straight lines across the screen like this, or if that fish decides wants to know, hey, what's going on up here on my kayak, it may swim up here to the top, which will give me these little streaked lines across there. Now, if a fish is kind of swimming around and it does swim in and out of my sonar beam, you may get something a little bit more like this, which is going to be more like the arches that you're normally used to seeing. Now the arches are caused from when a fish travels into your sonar beam and then back out the other side of it, which generally happens when you're actually driving around on the water. And so you're going to see that a lot more often than when you're just actually sitting still. Now I'm going to show you real quick what it looks like when your jig is actually in the water. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop my jig down real quick right here. And a lot of people actually call this video game fishing. And now as long as you have a large enough weight or jig on the line, it will show up on your sonar. So as I'm going to drop this down here, you're going to start to see it pop up on the screen and lower down. All right, now you see how that's starting to come across the screen there at the top? Now as I lower this line down, you can see how it's going to start getting lower on the screen here. Now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna start reeling it back up. And now it's kind of thinned out here a little bit on the screen, but let's go ahead and let's start reeling in, and you can see how it starts going back up. Now, if there are a lot of fish around, it's actually pretty neat because you can a lot of times see the fish actually jutting up towards your line right there on the screen. So you can see how this one shot up. That means there's a fish down there checking out what's going on with my line. Okay, now before we go ahead and start talking about these options over here on the right, there's just a few more things I want to show you. First off, what we can do is if we tap on the screen, anywhere right there, what happens is it brings up our crosshairs, and we can actually drag our screen left and right and be able to scroll around to be able to view past things that we've seen. So as we scroll back, let's say we wanted to look back at our line right there, and we wanted, maybe there was like a large fish, we can actually scroll back on there, and let's say we found like a really nice piece of structure at the bottom, we can actually click on it, and then we can go over right here and we can hit new waypoint. We're gonna hit save. And what that does, it's gonna save a waypoint on there, and that's gonna actually show up on our chart, so that way we can come back to the later point in time and we can find that piece of structure without actually having to be on our chart at that specific point in time. Now you can see here up at the top, this is actually gonna be our preview cursor. Now you can kind of do the same thing. We can touch on it right here on this little box, and we can drag it back and forth like that, just to quickly scroll around and just kind of see certain areas on there. Because like I said, it's a little miniaturized picture of your screen, and so if you look at it real closely, you can maybe be able to see and identify structure or something that's in there, and you can just quickly grab it, scroll over to it, and then set your waypoint on that spot. But whenever you're done, you need to make sure that you hit clear cursor, so that way it clears out of there and it goes back to the live screen. And as I mentioned before, where we have our plus and minus for our zoom in and zoom out, let's see, if we press our plus button, we can see how it zooms in on the screen, and it gives us our normal screen right there on the right as we had normally seen it, but in the main part of the screen, it's actually just a zoomed in picture on it. And you can zoom in as far as you want, or you can zoom all the way back out. I personally don't really care for the zoom function too much myself, but some of you may find it useful. Now let's go ahead and start off on our menu options here on the right. Now we have our mode listed here at the top. Now if we select it, what this is going to do is this is going to give us a bunch of really kind of just quick modes that we can select that are already kind of pre-set up for different areas that we may go fishing in. So let's say one day I'm fishing on a lake, I can go in here and I can select fresh, or I can go into shallow water, and it's going to set up a bunch of menu options just automatically for me. But then let's say the next day I go out on the ocean, I can switch it over to deep, just switch it right there, and then I don't have to go through and change all of my menu options all the way over and just kind of really mess them up, because I know a lot of you guys really like getting it dialed in to just how you like it. You don't want to have to change everything each time you go to maybe a different body of water. So you can easily go in here and select different options that you like. Now the general mode, this can really be used for anywhere. You know, a lot of people actually use it when they're in saltwater because it is set up to go to 1,000 feet. Now the shallow water mode, right there, that one's going to be really set up for 60 feet or less. So if you're going to be in water any deeper than that, I highly recommend switching up to the fresh water, which is actually designated to go up to 400 feet. Now, just because I say it goes up to 60 or 400 doesn't mean that it's not going to read actually deeper than that. It just means that the menu options are pre-set up for that particular depth. Now you have other things here. Like I said, you have your deep water, which like I said, it can go up to 1,000 feet or is pre-set up for that. You have options. You're going to be trolling around slowly if you want to troll around quickly. And clear water is almost identical to fresh water. It just has a few little bitty different options. Actually has a little bit of lower settings on the noise rejection because you don't really need your surface clarity turned up real high if the water is super clear. And so that's really going to be the only big difference between setting clear water and fresh water. And as we can see, we have these little pencils here. So whenever we go in and we select a particular mode, if we then go into our menu options and we make changes to that, it's going to put a little pencil there indicating that you've made changes to it. But if we want to go back and default it, we can select reset mode here at the bottom, and it's just going to default everything back to the original default settings for this particular mode. Now let's go ahead and go back. Okay, so now the next option we have here is going to be our range. Now, whenever we select range right here, it's generally automatically going to be set to auto. That's just the default option that it's always going to go to. But if you want to go in and set it to a manual range, we can click on it and we can turn off the auto down here at the bottom. Now we can go through and we can set a specific depth range that we want to see on the screen. However, generally, I like leaving mine on auto just because that way as I go around and the depth changes, I don't have to constantly keep going in here and adjusting it. But let's say, see how I'm in just 18 feet of water? If I wanted to and have a larger area of screen that I want to see for the actual area of water, I could go in here and set it to 20, and now we can see where we have a much larger area of screen that we can see for our fish. And now you can also see down here where we have the option for custom. We can go down here and we can set specific ranges that we want to set on our screen. So let's say if I was in salt water and I really was only interested in between 50 and 100 feet on my screen, I could go in here and set it and manually select it between 50 and 100 feet for my upper and lower limits. But for now, I'm going to just go ahead and hit cancel and leave it where it's at. And I'm going to turn my auto back on. Now let's go ahead here and select back. Now, one more thing, before we go any further, I want to point out the little options that we see listed here on the side. Now, whenever you see the little bars, like right here, where it has like 4 little bars listed on the right, now that means there's going to be other options beneath it, but only ones that are going to specifically be correlated to what the menu options listed. So like I said, we have our range here, and then we go in and we select it. It has other options to choose for our range. But now down here, if you can kind of see, like for advanced and more options, it has kind of like a little pointed arrow. That means that there are more options beneath it, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to what the word says for advanced or more options. There's just a bunch of other options listed behind it. We have our little bars here on the right. Whenever you have a bar like that, it means that it's going to give you some sort of a slider scale. So like if we go in here and we select sensitivity, we can see how we have a little scale that we can slide up and down and select that. And by looking at it, we can see how high or low that scale is actually set at. And you can see how there's different colors for green and orange. Green is always going to mean that something is set to auto. When you see something as orange, it means that it is manually selected. It doesn't have any kind of auto feature set to it. Now, as we go ahead and move on, the next option is going to be our frequency. Now we can see where mine is set to 200 kilohertz. When I select it, generally you're going to get these 4 options if you're using the active imaging 3-in-1 transducer that normally comes with this Fishfinder. Now I currently have mine set to 200 kilohertz. 200 is going to be the primary setting that you're going to have it set at if you're going to be fishing in anything deeper than, let's say, like 5 feet of water. So let's say if you're in somewhere deeper than 5 and up to 60 or 100 feet, you're going to want to set it on either 200 or high chirp. Now the 83 kilohertz or the medium chirp options are going to be really good if you're in just super shallow water or if you're in a much deeper water. The reason being for that is 200 kilohertz and the high chirp is a much more narrow focused beam and runs around 20 degrees. So that means that that beam is just real thin and narrow, and it's more focused, so it's not picking up as much information on the screen. Now, when we're running like on the 83 or the medium chirp, that ranges around 60 degrees. So it's a much wider beam. So it's actually picking up a lot more information down in the water. So if we were to switch, like you see, we go here to 83, it's going to give us just kind of a lot more clutter on the screen, and it's not going to be quite as sensitive to picking up the fish. Now you see, as we did that, we're not really getting any of those streaks on the screen from the fish that are just kind of sitting stationary. We're just getting a little bit of pixels. Now that's good if you're, like I said, you're in really shallow water, because you have such a wider beam, you're able to pick up a bigger area. So like when you're in 5 feet or less, you're going to want that. Or the other reason, if you want to use it in really deep water, is because the wavelengths are much further spread apart and they're able to travel through that water a greater distance than the more compressed frequency running like with the 200 kilohertz or the high chirp. Now, high chirp is what you would normally probably want to run it on. However, for whatever reason, Lowrance has made it to where you cannot run your high chirp and your structure scan at the same time. And so if you're running just sonar, it's great to be able to run high chirp. But if you're going to do anything with like your down scan, your side scan, or if you want to do any kind of like overlays where you're overlaying your sonar on top of the down scan, you need to have it set to 200 kilohertz. Because we can see if we go and select a high chirp here, it gives us a little message saying here that structure scan is not available when chirp is enabled. So we're going to go ahead and just set it back to 200 kilohertz. Now let's go ahead and go back. Now our next option here is going to be our sensitivity. Let's go ahead and click on it. Now I have mine set to auto. I really recommend just leaving it on auto most of the time, unless for some reason you're just getting a lot of clutter on the screen or you're just not picking up anything at all. Auto is going to probably be your best option. because what this unit does, it's smart enough to be able to detect differences in the water. If it feels like there's too much clutter or it's not picking it up enough, it'll automatically adjust that sensitivity level. What sensitivity actually does is it goes through and it determines how much information it's picking up from your transducer. If you go and we increase this as high as we can go, like that, so as we go up, it's actually kind of widening the beam in a sense, and it's picking up a lot more information in that water. It's not focusing it as much. And so that we get a whole lot more clutter on the screen. And then as we go down here and drop it down, we're actually narrowing that beam, or narrowing the focus of the beam per se, which causes it to not actually pick up as much. But which is a good thing if you're in really dirty water and it's really mucking up your screen. You can kind of lower that down a little bit. But the thing you have to know is that if you adjust this going up or down while it's in auto, if after a few minutes or 10 minutes, however long, the Fishfinder decides that that's not the correct setting for it, it'll automatically adjust it back to how it sees fit. If you don't want it to do that, we can go down here and see how we have the little green corner right there on auto, which means that auto is turned on. If we select it, that goes off. We're now in manual mode, which we can see we're now in orange, and we can go up and down with it, and that setting will save and it will not automatically adjust it out of there. But I'm going to go ahead and turn my auto back on, and then we're going to go back. Now the next choice here is going to be the color line. Now when we select it, what this is going to do is the higher we go with the color line here, kind of the more color you're going to pick up and the more yellow and green everything's going to become. And then the lower that we go with here, kind of the more darker and blue everything gets, and it kind of starts filtering out all those yellow colors. So really, I kind of recommend setting it at about 76, which is the default on here. But if for some reason, like I said, you're not picking up enough, you want to see a little bit more color on there or maybe a little bit less, you can go here and adjust it and just kind of fine tune it to what you feel suits you best. But let's go ahead and leave it there and go back. Now we only have two more options listed here at the bottom, which is our advanced and our more options. Now when we go into each one, we're going to have a whole bunch more menu options listed behind it. So let's go ahead and start off with advanced. Now that we're in advanced, we see we have a bunch of different options. Now these are actually going to affect more of the performance of the screen and what you're actually going to see on here. And they're probably the more important ones that you're actually going to want to play with. So depending on the type of water that you're in, you can see the first option here is going to be the noise rejection. Now if I go in here and click on it, generally it's going to default to low. Now the noise rejection is really designed to kind of filter out noise that you may be picking up from maybe other sonar signals that are in the water from other people that are driving around, or maybe you have two fish finders on your boat running two sonars at the same time. Well, sometimes you can get crosstalk or sonar interference from that, and you'll get a bunch of just kind of static or lines on the screen. And if you start to get that, you can go in and you can increase your noise rejection, and it'll help filter that out and give you a much clearer picture. But for me, I'm just on a kayak and I'm out here in the middle of the lake and no one's around, so I can just leave mine on low or off because I really don't need to use it. But for some of you guys, you may actually have to use that feature because you're picking up too much noise from maybe your motor or your trolling motor, or like I said, just other people in the water or other sonar signals. But for now, I'm going to leave mine on low and I'm going to go back. Now the next option here is your surface clarity, and this is actually a pretty important one. So when we select it, now what this is going to do is it's going to clear out the clutter around the top 5 feet of the water. So if I go in here to medium, we can see how it's kind of filtered out more there. And if I go into high, it pretty much removes it entirely. Now you might think, well, why don't I just always leave it on high to clear all that out? Well, the problem is that this is a filter. So if there are fish or anything up in that top area, it's going to also remove them from the screen. But because it is a filter, and it is, like I said, it's designed to filter out the top 5 feet, it also can't help but filter out some other information down below that. So I don't recommend going too high if you don't have to. Now I'm in pretty clear water right now, so I really don't need to set mine too high on the setting. But if you're in like a really dirty, mucky lake or something like that, or it's freshly rained, there's a lot of oxygen in the water, you may need to increase it up a little bit. But like I said, don't go too high because you might lose some of the fish on your screen. Now the next option here is going to be our scroll speed. Now when we select that, we can kind of go down with it to slow down, and what this does is it increases or slows down the speed at which the information scrolls across your screen. Now generally, I like setting mine at normal Or if I want to actually make my fish arches a little bit bigger as I'm moving around, I can go up to ×2. Like I said, it kind of stretches them out a little bit. However, if you are just kind of sitting still in the water, usually setting at normal is going to be about where you want to be at. Now let's go ahead and go back. Now our next choice on the screen here is going to be our ping speed. Now when we select on it, we can go all the way down if we want, we can go all the way up. Now what this does, this controls the speed at which our transducer sends out its sonar signals. I highly recommend just leaving it at max. They used to not come at max, like on the older software, on the older units. It would kind of be a couple steps down, and we would always recommend everyone go in here and go ahead and set it up to the max speed, because it's kind of giving you the max amount of information possible out of your transducer. So I'm going to go ahead, leave mine on max, and we're going to go ahead and go back. Now the other option down here is we can go into manual mode, and what this does is that's going to turn off all automatic settings like our automatic sensitivity or automatic range, and it's going to make everything just in a manual setting. Like I mentioned before, I kind of like having my auto range and my auto sensitivity turned on, so I'm going to leave my manual mode turned off. Then we're going to go ahead and go back. All right, now that we've gone back to the screen here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select the last option here, which is more options. Now these are going to be more just kind of menu options that are just going to give overall settings to the screen that aren't going to really necessarily affect our screen too much as far as the performance of it. Now the first option we see here is our stop sonar. Now a lot of people have asked me, my screen just says stops right in the middle of my screen. Now if it ever does that for any kind of reason, you can go in here, and if it looks like how we have this little orange corner right there, that means your stop sonar is selected, and you can just simply click on it and turn that off, and then allow it to start scrolling again. But what's nice about the stop sonar is that it does have your transducer stop pinging. So let's say you have this transducer up on your trolling motor and you're done fishing in a particular area and you're going to go drive somewhere else. It's a good idea to hit the stop sonar, because what that does is, like I said, it stops the pinging. So when you pull your trolling motor up out of the water and you go drive to another spot and you drop it back down, as long as that transducer is not pinging and you put it back in the water and you unstop it, usually allows it to pick the bottom right back up real quickly. Sometimes if you drive around while your sonar is pinging like that, it will lose the bottom, and it may take a little bit before it'll lock back on. So I highly recommend hitting the stop sonar before you go and pull the trolling motor out of the water. Now the next option here is going to be split. Now I usually don't use my split screen too often, but if you want to, we can click on it, and we see that we have 3 options here. The first one is our zoom. So we can hit it to where it gives us a little split screen on here. And then if we press our plus or minus buttons here, so I'm going to press my plus, you can see how it kind of zooms in, and you see how that has these little lines right here on the screen on the right. You can actually grab that and slide up and down and be able to scroll around and zoom in on that particular area of the screen. Now the next one is going to be the bottom lock. Now it's going to be kind of similar, except for we see that we don't have the lines, and it's always going to be locked right there onto the bottom. Now you can also see how the depth scale has flipped right there. So it actually tells us how far off the bottom a specific object or fish actually is. So that can be pretty useful. And the last option here is going to be our flasher. Now this is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of the kind of old school fishermen like the flasher mode. I don't really care for it too much. I kind of prefer seeing my screen personally. And so most of the time I'm going to leave my split off. Now let's go ahead and go back. Now the next option down here is going to be your palette. Now, a lot of times when you first start off, you're going to be on palette 1, which is going to give you just kind of the yellow bottom, different colors like that. And you can go through and you can switch whatever type of color palette actually fits your needs best. Now, me personally, I really like number 13. It gives us like this bottom contour tracking. So when we select it, we can see how it turns the bottom brown. So whenever we have, like, say, there's structure or fish sitting on the bottom, those fish are going to be bright colored right there. And so it's going to really help you distinguish between maybe what's a catfish or something sitting on the bottom and what's the bottom itself. I've also heard from a lot of other people they like number 14 because they prefer to use that blue background. To me, I don't care for it too as much. I think it's a little bit harder to see the objects in the water, but I know a lot of guys who enjoy that better. But I'm going to set mine back to number 13, and I'm going to go back. Now our next option on here is going to be our overlay down scan. Now what that's going to do is it's going to take our down scan and it's going to overlay it on top of our sonar screen. Now I don't really care for this option myself. If you want to overlay both of them, I highly recommend using the reveal option instead, which is where it's actually on your down scan screen, and it takes just what's in the middle of your sonar screen and overlays it on top of it. So that way it allows you to be able to see your down scan, all of your structure, but you can also see your fish arches very clearly on the screen. So when we went in and we selected overlay down scan, if we go back, we now have this new option that pops up right here that says down scan options. We can select it and we can actually go through and we can control all the different menu options for our down scan. So we can go in and we control, right, for our overlay, we can decide how much information we actually want to overlay on the screen. So as we see, we can go up and down, we can add or remove the amount of structure it shows. We can go in here and we can adjust the contrast, which is really just the brightness or darkness of the down scan screen itself. And then we also have the palette where we can go in and we can select different colors for the down scan that overlays on top of it. And then you also have our frequency where we can select between 800 kilohertz or 455. I'll go over the frequencies for downscan on my structure scan video a little bit better. Just for now, all you need to know is that the 800 kilohertz is a more high resolution image, and it's going to give you more structure, but it's a more narrowed focus, and so it may not pick up as much information further out to the sides. And the other thing is that if you're in really clear water, 800 is usually the best, but if the water's kind of murky, 455 works a little bit better because, like I said, it's not quite as sensitive and it may not clutter up your screen quite as much. Now you also have like your noise rejection where you can turn it on and off. Like where I showed you before, we had where we can go in for low, medium, or high on our sonar. With downscan, you just have the ability to turn it on or off. And then you have the same thing for your surface clarity. We can go in and we can adjust how much information we want to show up here at the top. Now let's go ahead and go back. We're going to go in here and I'm going to turn off my overlay downscan for now. So now we have our nice pretty screen as we saw once before. Now our next choice here is our temperature graph. Now when we select it, you're going to notice here at the top, it has a little temperature scale where mine shows between 95 and 85. And if you look real closely, there's this thin little red line. So if I turn it off, you can see how it goes away, turn back on. And basically what that does is if you don't want to have your water temperature overlay on there, you can turn this on and you can just kind of gauge to see where the line is in between there to get a good idea of what the water temperature is without having to have the water temperature overlay turned on. But I don't find it very useful myself, so I'm going to turn it off. The next one is also the depth line. Now when we select it, it's just going to give us a little line down here at the bottom to kind of help distinguish between what is the bottom and what is fish or structure. Now, like I showed you before, when we choose that bottom tracking on the palette number 13, it already kind of does that for us. So if you're running that palette, you really don't need the depth line turned on. Now, the very next option here, if we scroll up just a little bit, is going to be our amplitude scope. Now what this does, it's kind of like a vertical flasher on the screen right there. It just kind of gives you an indication of where objects are showing up as they're being written across the screen there. To me, it just kind of fills up a little bit too much screen for me, so I don't care for it myself. But those guys who really like the flasher mode, but they don't want to run a split screen, this is a really good option for them. But for now, I'm going to turn mine off. Now, my second to last choice here is going to be my preview. Now, when I showed you before and I touched on the screen here and it brought up that little preview cursor at the top, this is how you can control it. Now, when we go and select here, we can go between off, cursor only, or always. Now, what cursor only means is that it's only going to show up at the top of the screen when I tap on it like this. Now, if I go in and I set it to always, this is always going to be on the screen no matter what. So you don't have to tap on the screen to get it to show up. It's just always going to be giving you this little playback at the top of the screen. Now again, that takes up a little bit too much screen for me, so I prefer to have mine on the cursor only. Let's go ahead and go back. We're going to go back. And when you have it on here, you have the option up here to clear cursor. So you need to tap on that to be able to remove that off the screen. Now let's go back in. Now the very last choice here is going to be our fish ID. Now a lot of guys really love this, especially for beginners, because what it's going to do for us is if we go in here, we have a couple different choices where we can choose if we just want the little fish symbols, or if we just want the depth numbers, or if we want both. So I'll show you if I select symbols, what it's going to do is it's going to give us these little images of fish on the screen there. Now, the problem with it is that just because something is on the screen doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actual fish, but the Fishfinder thinks that anything that shows up on the screen is a fish. And so sometimes it can be a little bit inaccurate. As we can see here on the streak that we had right there, it's giving us multiple fish, which obviously that's not 4 or 5 different fish, that was just one that kind of swam up towards the surface. Or we can go in and we can select depth, which what that does, it just gives us little depth numbers so we can kind of easily see how deep down in the water that object is. Or we can select both, and it gives us both the depth numbers and the little fish icons. Now, I don't really care for it because I don't use that myself. I'm a bit more advanced with it, so I'm going to leave mine off. But you can also go down here and select fish ID beeps. So that way, anytime it detects one of those little fish symbols, it's going to make a little beep or chirp at you, just to kind of let you know, say, hey, I picked up a fish on the screen, look at me. But because it does pick up so much, it will constantly be beeping. I find it a little bit annoying myself, so I don't generally use it, but some of you guys might actually really like it. So go ahead and play with it and see what works for you. That's really going to be it as far as for the sonar video. Now, if you like the video, please go ahead and like it down below and click the little thumbs up so that way you'll get notifications when I come out with new videos. Also subscribe to the channel. I've got a ton of other videos that I'm always making. I've got a lot of other ones already on there. So go on there, check them out. Let me know if you like them and leave a comment down below if you have any questions and I'll come back and answer them for you. So thanks again so much guys for watching. And as always, stay safe out there.